Today, it's one of our strongest economic partners, certainly in the hemisphere, and an important catalyst for so much trade and commerce that happens in the United States.
Secretary of State Marco Rubio speaking in Panama on his first international trip. His tour through Central America shows Trump is setting his priorities on our closest neighbors. His administration is trying to balance building relations with countries in the Western Hemisphere and putting pressure on initiatives it says hurt the interests of the United States. Welcome to EWTN News In Depth. I'm Montse Alvarado in This Week for Catherine Hadro. It's been more than a century since the Secretary of State made Latin America the destination of a first international trip. Rubio's visit puts the region in a new spotlight, but it also shows Trump's priorities, cracking down on immigration into the United States and loosening China's ties on Central America. It was a busy 6 days for Rubio as he toured Central America, visiting El Salvador, Costa Rica, Guatemala, and the Dominican Republic. His first stop was Panama.
And we didn't give that to China, we gave it to Panama. We shouldn't have given it to Panama, but Panama, as you know, has violated the agreement, totally violated the agreement.
Much of Rubio's visit to Panama concerned the Panama Canal and Trump's claim that it's now under the management of China. The United States built the canal in the early 20th century and until 1999 operated it as well. It serves as a vital link for global trade and generates $5 billion in revenue every year. Trump says Panama broke its deal of neutrality when it, quote, gave China the canal. Panamanian President José Raúl Mulino denies that claim.
There seems to be some confusion between the channel and the ports that needs to be cleared up. The adjacent ports, all of them, have no involvement in the administration of the canal, none whatsoever.
Trump's call for America to retake the canal has been met with condemnation, both from Panama's president and its people. But China's growing influence in the country is undeniable. In 2017, Panama became the first country to sign on to China's Belt and Road Initiative, a massive project that seeks to connect East Asia and Europe through railways, pipelines, highways, and maritime routes.
It's basically the Chinese Communist Party's imperial vision to turn the economic orientation of the whole world away from Washington and toward Beijing, away from the West and toward the East. And usually with the Belt and Road, you find that once you make that deal, you either have trouble paying off the loans over time, and oftentimes you'll find China's military come knocking at your door because they want to start basing or have some sort of presence in your country.
A Hong Kong-based company operates seaports at both ends of the waterway. They're not state-owned, but are subject to China's national security laws. Michael Sobolik, a senior fellow with the Hudson Institute, says that could pose serious issues for the United States.
Imagine that China forward deploys either some sort of military ships or cargo ships that have missiles in them, or ships that they just literally use to preposition and block canal access. So the danger is, what if the US military either is denied transit through the canal by Beijing, or what if that transit is even at least delayed? That is an unacceptable scenario, and it is a crisis scenario because we have vital interests within the first island chain in the Indo-Pacific.
Rubio did not repeat Trump's call to retake the canal, but did tell Mulino that his country would face action if it did not cut ties with China's Belt and Road Initiative.
The Memorandum of Understanding of 2017 on the Silk Route, the Belt and Road Initiative, will not be renewed by my government.
On his last day in Panama, Rubio turned his focus to another top priority for Trump, immigration. And before boarding a plane of his own, watched a deportation flight with dozens of immigrants depart for Colombia. In El Salvador, the focus on immigration continued when Rubio received an unprecedented deal from current President Nayib Bukele. The country would not only receive Salvadoran deportees who illegally entered the United States into its massive prison system for a fee, but, quote, any illegal alien in the United States who is a criminal from any nationality. It is unclear whether the U.S. will take up the offer.
We'll have to study it on our end. There are obviously legalities involved. We have a constitution. We have all sorts of things, but it's a very generous offer. No one's ever made an offer like that. And to outsource at a fraction of the cost at least some of the most dangerous and violent criminals that we have in the United States.
On Wednesday, Guatemala's President Bernardo Arevalo promised Rubio his country would increase deportation flights carrying migrants by 40%. These immigration agreements highlight Trump's effort not only to increase deportations from the U.S., but to stop migration at its source.
We also understand from the United States that most people who come in here have as a goal eventually making it to the United States. So you could say that at a certain point, our border doesn't begin at Texas or Mexico. It begins a lot before.
To discuss the Secretary of State's visit to Central America, we're joined by EWTN contributor Alberto Fernandez. During his time working at the U.S. State Department, he served as a diplomat in both Nicaragua and Guatemala. Thank you so much for joining us, Alberto. In a piece for the Wall Street Journal, Rubio said his trip signifies an America's first policy. He writes, "For many reasons, U.S. foreign policy has long focused on other regions while overlooking our own. As a result, we've let problems fester, missed opportunities, and neglected partners. That ends now." Why do you think the United States is turning to its regional neighbors in this administration in particular?
Well, I think it's various points. Number one, there is a sense, as Rubio said in that piece, that we've spent a lot of attention, a lot of time and money in, let's say, less productive parts of the world, say the Middle East, and kind of neglected our relationships in this hemisphere. While we neglected our relationships in this hemisphere, we've seen a tremendous growth in Chinese influence and interference in the hemisphere, and also seen, of course, the rise of hostile states to the United States, the three that Marco Rubio and President Trump have mentioned at past times: Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela.
Do you think the United States will actually retake the Panama Canal, as Trump says? Are his comments on China's role and control of it legitimate?
Well, I think, the president's remarks are pretty clear, but also knowing his style of negotiating, it seems like it's a maximalist position where the other part is going to have to negotiate. And certainly that seems to have happened as a result of the Rubio visit. There have been a couple of things that Panama has done to kind of change the equation, and there could very well be more.
And when you mention that style, how do those comments impact relations with Latin America and the broader region?
Well, I mean, it's always, how is that received? I think it's received seriously, if not literally, as a famous article about President Trump said. Certainly, it's serious when the most powerful man in the world has something to say about you, and you need to take it seriously and see how you react.
Well, let's turn to El Salvador and that proposal to keep America's inmates in its own prisons. What do you think of that deal? Is it unprecedented? Could it actually happen as a collaboration between two countries? I know there are some experts who say it's neither legal nor ethical.
Well, I mean, we're talking about illegal criminal aliens. In other words, we're talking about people who have committed a serious crime in the United States, been convicted, and who are supposed to be deported. So I think it may be a gray area that we actually haven't addressed in the past before. Now, there have been in the past, when different countries here or there, arrangements made between the United States and a partner to house or to detain people. But you're absolutely right. This is kind of uncharted waters. But as I said, we're not talking about American citizens. We're not talking about people who have a right to be in the United States. They're both serious criminals and people who are supposed to be deported.
Well, something to watch for sure. Much of Rubio's trip was overshadowed by news from Washington, notably shuttering the United States Agency for International Development, or USAID, which Rubio says he now runs as part of the State Department. Do you see that impacting our relationships with Latin American nations, where USAID's work really was a feature of soft power in the region?
Yes, but it could impact for the good as well. I mean, I've served, especially in Guatemala. I remember that USAID's activities were a lightning rod, and there was a broad sense in the society that at least some of the things that they were doing was kind of politically tinged social engineering, from the United States. In other words, that USAID and the Americans had a heavy hand with their Latin American partners. And so many people will welcome a different AID that focuses on cooperation and humanitarian assistance without that heavy politicized, maybe leftist orientation.
Now, Rubio is the son of Cuban immigrants and a fluent Spanish speaker, not to mention a practicing Catholic as well. How do you see that shaping his trip, shaping his impact in the region?
Well, I think both of those are really important elements, and I would add two more, and that is, of course, he was a U.S. Senator for 14 years who worked a lot on Latin America. And of course, he is, like me, from Miami, and, many people have called Miami the capital of Latin America, which has, as you know, Monse, vibrant exile and immigrant communities, and you get to know Colombians and Venezuelans and Nicaraguans and whatever. So I think all of those things working together give Secretary Rubio a unique and I think a very powerful and positive perspective.
While in Costa Rica, Marco Rubio called the governments of Nicaragua, Venezuela, and Cuba enemies of humanity, obviously influenced by exactly what you just described with his experience in Miami. He particularly was denouncing Nicaragua for attempting to eliminate the Catholic Church or any entity that threatens the regime's power. How do you hope that the Trump administration will support religious freedom in Nicaragua?
Well, Nicaragua is a fascinating case because it has weaponized migration flows, made it a funding source for itself, directed against the United States. And that happened during the Biden administration, and it suffered no penalty at all. I mean, Nicaragua is still has access to American markets. And so this regime is not just oppressing its own people, it's openly taking actions against the United States. And so a reaction from Washington is overdue. And I would just mention that, when Marco Rubio says enemies of humanity, of course, he's probably also referring to the infamous Sandinista hymn, which says, "We fight against the Yankee, the enemy of humanity." So I think there's a little bit of poking there he is of the Sandinista regime.
That's really interesting context for a lot of our viewers who I don't know actually have that memory of the Sandinistas. Thank you so much, Alberto. It's always great to have you on. Your insights are really remarkable. I hope that we'll be able to have you on again.
Thank you.